When you picture the world's most formidable air forces, your mind goes to the obvious places: the United States Air Force, the combined air arms of NATO made up of squadrons of fifth-generation fighters, billion-dollar procurement budgets, and decades of carefully refined doctrine. But over the past 4 years, something's been taking shape in the skies above Ukraine that doesn't fit any of those categories. In the shortest possible terms, the raw number of people flying combat drones into battle every single day has quietly grown to a scale that few militaries anywhere in the world can match. Ukraine has built an aerial fighting force on a scale that even NATO, with all its money and all its institutional experience, has never once attempted. And the story of how they built it tells you almost everything you need to know about how this war is now being fought. Let's start with the numbers, because they're genuinely hard to believe. According to official statements from the armed forces of Ukraine, roughly 80,000 service members are now involved in drone operations in one form or another. The exact number of trained pilots inside that figure is classified. Ukraine doesn't publish it, and as you'll see, it has very good reasons not to. But frontline operators and unit commanders estimate that somewhere between 25,000 and 40,000 of those troops are active combat drone pilots. These are men and women flying robotic aircraft against Russian forces across every branch of the military. Those are also estimates from the people doing the flying, not a published order of battle, and the real figure sits behind a wall of operational secrecy. But even the conservative end of that range is extraordinary. To understand why, you have to set it against a traditional air force. Take Italy's air force and count everyone: the pilots, the mechanics, the weather forecasters, the cooks, the generals, and all of their staff officers. The official count is somewhere between 35,000 and 43,000 people. Of course, only around 1,500 are actual pilots. The United States, for its part, stations roughly 30,000 to 35,000 airmen across the whole of Europe, and only 2,000 to 3,000 of them fly. Now let's do the bigger sum, adding up every NATO pilot outside of North America. Every fast jet pilot, transport, tanker and helicopter crew across every European member state on the map adds up to around 15,000 aviators. That's the entire pilot air power of NATO's European wing. Ukraine's combat drone pilot force, by the low-end estimate, already exceeds that number. By the high-end estimate, it's more than double that. That kind of comparison reframes what Ukraine has actually built. This is not just a drone program, but functionally the largest combat aviation force in the Western world, and it was assembled almost from nothing and entirely during wartime. Now within that force sits an elite corps called Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, or SBS, using the Ukrainian abbreviation. This is a dedicated military branch that didn't even exist as such a few years ago, and in 2026 numbers around 15,000 personnel in its own right. But the SBS is only the most visible, most professionalized slice of the whole. Beyond it, dedicated drone units now operate inside more than 100 maneuver brigades and close to 500 separate battalions and regiments. This is the key point that the headline figure can obscure. Drones are not a specialist capability bolted onto the side of the Ukrainian army. They've become the army's primary way of combat, and that's not an exaggeration. Consider what these pilots are actually responsible for on the battlefield. In early May 2026, Ukrainian officials and independent analysts estimated that drones account for somewhere between 70 and 90% of all Russian casualties. The Polish Research Institute OSW reached a similar conclusion even earlier in October 2025, attributing roughly 70 to 80% of Russian losses and close to 85% of destroyed frontline equipment to unmanned systems. Of course, no one can audit the battlefield in real time, and Ukrainian sources have every incentive to emphasize their successes. But analysts across multiple institutions keep landing in the same range, which itself is telling. The Ukrainian side even put hard numbers to it. Mikhailo Fedorov, the Minister of Digital Transformation and the official overseeing the drone effort, said that Ukrainian strike and bomber drones carried out almost 820,000 confirmed hits over the course of 2025. Notably, all of these were verified by drone video. By that accounting, more than 80% of all Russian targets destroyed that year were destroyed by drones, the overwhelming majority of them domestically built. The commander of the SBS claimed that Ukraine's tracking system recorded more than 156,000 Russian soldiers killed or wounded by drones alone in the 5 months between December 2025 and April 2026. Even if the figures are slightly overblown, the sheer scale they describe is consistent with what outside observers are seeing and with how stalled the front line is in terms of lack of Russian advance throughout 2025. The cumulative effect here has actually physically reshaped the battlefield. It's not disingenuous to describe Ukraine's war as a machine war, in which the front is increasingly held not by mass infantry, but by small drone crews and the aircraft they control. Internal Ukrainian data found that drones accounted for roughly 69% of strikes on Russian troops and 75% of strikes on vehicles and equipment as far back as 2024, and the share has only grown since. A drone kill zone now reaches some 20 kilometers behind the front line, choking Russian logistics, forcing supply convoys to break apart and move in ones and twos, and turning the simple act of bringing food and ammunition forward into a daily ordeal. Ukrainian commanders can have fewer soldiers hold long stretches of front and survive precisely because drones increase their reach and operational capabilities. None of this would be possible without an industrial base that Ukraine built from the ground up. As of early 2026, Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defense, Sergei Boyev, said he's confident the country had the capacity to produce more than 7 million FPV drones that year. This is nearly quadruple what it made in 2024. The entire industry has over 160 companies building FPV drones domestically. This is the opposite of how Ukraine started in early 2022, importing cheap drones from China and outfitting them with makeshift grenades and mines. So, not only does Ukraine have the people who can fly drones, it has various drone models all on its own that are tailor-made for the field situation. And the best part is that the drones aren't even confined to the front line. The same industrial base produces long-range strike drones that have reached targets more than 1,500 kilometers inside Russia. For the past several months, Ukraine has been striking oil refineries, ammunition depots, and military airfields at distances Western governments have previously been reluctant to permit with their own supplied weapons. Back in 2024, there was a months-long debate about using ATACMS, which has a range of a few hundred kilometers. In 2026, Ukraine is reaching 600 kilometers regularly, and some of the more ambitious models like Firepoint's FP5, technically a cruise missile, have a range of 3,000 kilometers. Ukraine's leadership has taken to calling this the long-range sanctions campaign, a deliberate effort to degrade the infrastructure feeding the Russian war machine. So, the aerial force we're describing operates across the entire depth of the war at once. Tactical FPV drones killing within a few kilometers of the trenches, interceptors guarding the cities far behind them, and long-range strike drones reaching the deep interior of Russia. So how did a country that was importing hobbyist quadcopters 4 years ago end up here? If we go back to 2014, to the first Russian incursion into the Donbass, the earliest Ukrainian drone pilots were semi-hobbyists. They taught themselves tactics, bought commercial aircraft with their own money or with donations, and improvised reconnaissance during the years of low-intensity fighting in the east. When the full-scale invasion came in February 2022, that improvised knowledge suddenly had to scale across an entire army overnight, initially for reconnaissance, as units scrambled to put eyes in the air across Ukraine. What began as a niche capability quickly became one of the defining features of the war. Facing a Russian army that still held a heavy advantage in conventional firepower, Ukraine had to find something cheap, abundant, and lethal to fill the gap, which turned out to be strike drones. In the bluntest possible terms, drones became the new artillery, and the shell shortage only further reinforced the need for more drones. This created a positive feedback loop, where each successful drone mission was hailed and helped fund more like them. By 2026, Ukraine had one of the most robust drone operator training programs in the world. Civilians were suddenly signing contracts, and serving soldiers switching specializations are expected to pass certified flight training before they deploy. The country has a network of flight academies that converts novices into capable operators in roughly 1 or 2 months. Most importantly, these are composed of several layers, such as schools run by individual combat units for profit businesses and programs funded directly by the drone manufacturers themselves. That's because Russia actively hunts these facilities to kill the instructors and trainees inside them, so their locations and numbers are kept strictly classified. And the distributed nature means it's far less likely that a lucky strike removes a bulk of Ukraine's training capabilities. A few of these schools have allowed glimpses inside. There's a Center of Special Training, or CST, based in the Zaporizhia region, founded in mid-2024 by a volunteer group whose director had previously spent 14 months commanding a frontline drone strike unit. It runs on a cost recovery basis, training new inductees, veterans, and active operators, and in 2026 switched focus to operating interceptor drones, the next major category that could spearhead Ukraine's defensive efforts. The major manufacturer Skyfall turned flight training into a service offered alongside its hardware. A company representative told the Kyiv Post that between 2023 and 2026, Skyfall's flight schools have trained more than 20,000 operators, with the whole effort financed entirely by the company. And frontline units run their own pipelines too. In the 4th Heavy Brigade, recently deployed in the brutal Konstantinovka-Druskivka sector, passing basic school is only the start. Graduates are assigned as junior pilots to a small drone section and spend their first months flying under the close supervision of veterans before they're trusted to run missions on their own. The military-run 239th Center of Unit Training, meanwhile, offers a window into just how structured this has become. It maintains an instructor-to-student ratio of roughly 1:10, and its courses are tailored to specific aircraft. For example, qualification on a basic Chinese-made Mavic quadcopter takes 39 days, a Vampir heavy bomber drone 40 to 45 days, and a full first-person view combat qualification close to 2 months. These are genuine combat-oriented courses. The operator uses a gaming controller and chair instead of a rifle. The short training time and large throughput are in part because Ukraine precisely needs that level of haste. Now, before we get to that, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show. We cover daily stories so you can stay up to date with global geopolitics. Now, the reason why Ukraine is so hell-bent on training more drone operators than any other country is due to internal pressure to replace manpower with drones. The military frequently lists UAV operators as the most sought-after military roles, and the pool is wide and well beyond the stereotype of the young gamer. Women now make up a growing share of those entering UAV training, and pilots interviewed at a 2026 competition in the west of the country ranged in age from their early 20s to their 50s. What unites them, those pilots said, is not reflexes or a gaming background, but discipline, teamwork, and constant adaptation. And then there's the part of this story that comes closest to a true technological edge: the simulators. Modern Ukrainian drone training leans heavily on advanced software, and the standout example is a program called FPV Battleground, built by a small team at a Ukrainian company called Bazu for a reported $50,000. To grasp why that's remarkable, consider the alternatives. The military had previously trained on a far simpler simulator that ran basic missions in a tiny 2-kilometer virtual space. Russia, for its part, released an arcade-style FPV game on Steam in 2024. Bazu went in the opposite direction, chasing extreme realism. FPV Battleground gives trainees a massive 40 by 40 kilometer sandbox with a flight physics model that simulates real-world wind, drift, varying rotor torque, and changing weather. Notably, the simulator replicates the exact moment a pilot dreads, losing video and signal if the FPV drone flies into the radius of a Russian jammer during the final seconds of an attack run, when the operator is blind and the drone is on its own. So Ukraine is actually training pilots to handle that in a simulator before they ever face it over a real target. And the program has grown into something beyond training. Before ground assaults, brigade and corps staffs now build precise digital models of their objectives inside the simulator, then run strike iterations to optimize how drones will support the attack. The simulator can accurately rehearse the battle before it happens. Now, we have to circle back to one category of drone worth going in depth, because it's rewritten Ukraine's air defense: interceptor drones. These are small, fast quadcopters built specifically to chase down and ram Russian attack drones in flight. The concept emerged in 2024 as a cornerstone of Ukraine's defense against Russia's nightly Shahed barrages. By some estimates, in May 2026, Russia launched 8,160 Shahed drones at Ukraine, and some attacks involved as many as 800 of them in one go. By late May 2026, interceptors accounted for roughly 30% of all Russian aerial threats shot down, meaning that every third kill has been scored not by a missile, but by another drone. The entire point here is economics. An interceptor drone costing a few $1,000s is being used to destroy threats that would otherwise demand a surface-to-air missile costing hundreds of times more. But the pilots flying drones often need to sit close to the front, watching the sky. That makes them a target, and here, the Ukrainian manufacturer's answer was to remove the pilot from the danger zone entirely. According to Skyfall, the company has developed a way for Interceptor pilots to operate from hundreds or even thousands of miles from the front line via satellite-based internet. In some cases, the setup can be done on another continent altogether. Wild Hornet, the maker of the Sting Interceptor, built a comparable system called Hornet Vision Control. The records being set with that technology border on the surreal. Wild Hornets claim that an operator can accurately control a drone from a distance of 2,000 kilometers. Of course, these are the manufacturer's own claims, promoted in their own footage, so there's a chance that the number is a bit of an overestimate under ideal scenarios. But regardless of that, the underlying logic is sound. If your most valuable and most hunted personnel never have to be physically near the targets they're hunting, you've solved a survivability problem that every other military on Earth still lives with. What ultimately makes the whole system work is its pragmatism. There is a near-continuous feedback loop running between the pilots flying combat missions, the schools training the next wave, and the companies building the aircraft. A tactic that worked yesterday on the front can be written into the curriculum within days. A Russian countermeasure spotted in the morning can reshape an afternoon's training. The instruction adapts week to real-world conditions, something we've previously seen in the drone acquisition platform and the gamification for drone operating squads. So let's step back a bit. NATO has bigger budgets than Ukraine could dream of. It has stealth fighters, aerial refueling, satellite constellations, airborne early warning, and generations of accumulated air-power doctrine. In almost every conventional category, the alliance is far ahead. So what exactly has Ukraine built that NATO couldn't? The answer is that Ukraine had to build the whole system from scratch. NATO has never had to generate a mass combat aviation force out of ordinary civilians in a matter of months. It's never run training schools whose curricula are rewritten week to week by direct feedback from pilots fighting that same day. It's never fielded distributed, remotely operated air defense at this scale, born from the simple necessity of keeping its operators alive. NATO hasn't built these things because it's never been forced to. Ukraine was. The irony is that the traffic in expertise now runs the other way. Ukrainian drone manufacturers have been traveling across Europe to share what they've learned, and NATO planners are racing to stand up a layered counter-drone system along the alliance's eastern flank. Denmark became the first country to fund Ukrainian weapons production in 2024, and after a July 2025 defense agreement, Ukraine launched its first joint drone production line in Denmark in September 2025. Germany followed suit by launching a program to manufacture exact Ukrainian UAV models. Similar things happened to the UK, Romania, and France, with each either manufacturing drones from Ukraine or outlining cooperation projects. Even the EU as a whole has set up a drone alliance with Ukraine to bolster cross-communication and allow any company in those countries to apply and become a part of the program. And at the core of this is one single factor that's practically impossible to replicate anywhere else in the world: real-life experience. Ukraine has had millions of flight hours in drones, all made to defend the country against an invader that's by all accounts much larger. And through that, Ukraine has managed to establish its place as a potential world superpower, at least where drone combat is concerned. And Russia is paying the price, with the country's forces, economy, and even political system collapsing in real time. To learn more, check out this video. And make sure to subscribe to The Military Show for more news on global geopolitics.